The sound of glass breaking at 2:47 a.m. wasn't what woke me. It was the silence that followed. The kind of deliberate, breath-holding quiet that screams of someone trying not to be heard. My husband David was snoring softly beside me, completely oblivious to the intrusion happening in our home. For a moment I lay frozen, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then I heard the soft creak of our hardwood floors, the same spot near the kitchen island that always protested under weight. Someone was in our house. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My heart hammered against my ribs as I carefully slipped out of bed, grateful for the yoga classes that had taught me to move silently. David didn't stir. The man could sleep through a tornado, a trait that had been endearing during our 3 years of marriage, but was proving problematic now. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my thumb hovering over 911 as I crept toward the bedroom door. The hallway stretched before me like a dark tunnel, lit only by the pale glow of the security system panel near the front door. The green light indicated the system was armed, which sent a chill down my spine. Whoever was downstairs either had the code or had found another way in. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ear. There it was again, the soft whisper of movement, deliberate and careful. The intruder was in our kitchen, and from the measured pace of their movements, they weren't frantically grabbing valuables and running. They were taking their time, which somehow made it work. This wasn't a random break-in. This was personal. I thought about waking David, but something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the strange familiarity of the footsteps below. They had a rhythm I almost recognized, though I couldn't place it. Instead of retreating to wake my husband, I found myself moving forward, drawn by a need to see who had violated our sanctuary. The stairs were my biggest obstacle. Each step was a potential betrayal, a creak that could announce my presence. I'd lived in this house for 3 years, but terror had erased my memory of which boards were safe. I tested each step with my toes before committing my full weight, a process that felt like it took hours, but probably lasted only minutes. From the halfway point on the stairs, I could see into the kitchen through the open concept design we'd loved so much when house hunting. The space was illuminated by the under-cabinet lighting we'd left on for late-night water runs. What I saw made my blood freeze. A woman stood at our kitchen island, methodically going through the contents of my purse. She wasn't rifling through it like a desperate drug addict looking for cash. She was examining each item carefully, placing things in neat piles. My credit cards went into one stack, my identification into another. She was organizing my life into categories, and the clinical precision of it was more terrifying than any smash-and-grab robbery would have been. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there. That's when it hit me, the recognition that had been dancing at the edges of my consciousness. I knew those movements. I knew that profile. It was Margaret, my mother-in-law. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a stranger who'd broken into our home. This was David's mother, the woman who'd raised him, the woman who'd welcomed me into the family with warm hugs and home-cooked meals, the woman who still had a key to our house from when she'd watched it while we were on our honeymoon. Margaret continued her methodical inventory of my belongings, completely unaware of my presence on the stairs. She pulled out my social security card, why had I been carrying, and photographed it with her phone before carefully placing it back. My driver's license received the same treatment. She was documenting everything, creating some kind of digital record. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. Part of me wanted to retreat, to pretend I'd never seen this, to wake up tomorrow and carry on with the comfortable illusion that my mother-in-law was simply the sweet, if sometimes overbearing woman I'd known for 3 years. But the other part of me, the part that was already feeling violated and betrayed, needed answers. I crept down 2 more steps, getting a better view of the kitchen. That's when I saw it, A large canvas shopping bag sitting on the floor beside the island, already filled with items from our home. I could see the corner of David's laptop sticking out, along with several pieces of my jewelry that I kept in the kitchen junk drawer. Things I wouldn't have noticed missing right away. Margaret reached into the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of my prescription medication, anxiety pills I'd been prescribed after a car accident last year. She examined the label closely, took another photo and then slipped the bottle into her jacket pocket. The casual theft of my medication, something I needed to function normally, ignited a fury in me that burned away the fear. I fumbled with my phone, opening the camera app and starting a video recording. My hands were steadier now, fueled by anger rather than terror. If this was really happening, if my mother-in-law was really stealing from us, I needed proof. David would never believe it otherwise. Margaret had always been his golden child's perfect mother, incapable of wrongdoing in his eye. Through the camera lens, I watched Margaret continue her systematic pillaging of our home. She opened cabinet doors I didn't even know she knew existed, searching with the thoroughness of someone who'd been planning this for a while. From a high shelf, she retrieved the emergency cash we kept in an old coffee can, money even I sometimes forgot was there. She counted it carefully before adding it to her shopping bag. The scope of her knowledge about our home was chilling. She wasn't wandering around randomly bumping into things and hoping for the best. She knew exactly where we kept everything valuable, everything private, everything we thought was safely hidden. How long had she been watching us? How many times had she been in our house when we weren't home? I zoomed in as she moved to our home office area, a small nook we'd set up near the living room. She powered on our desktop computer, and somehow knew the password. The screen illuminated her face as she navigated through our files with disturbing familiarity. I watched her plug in a USB drive and begin copying folders, bank documents, tax returns, insurance policies. She was downloading our entire financial life. My thumb found the 911 button on my phone, but I hesitated. What would I tell them? That my mother-in-law was in my house with permission. Technically, since she had a key, that she was stealing from us. But it was family, so maybe they'd suggest we work it out privately. I needed more than this. I needed to understand what she was really doing and why. Margaret finished with the computer and moved to a filing cabinet we kept locked. From her jacket she produced a small set of picks and went to work on the lock with practiced efficiency. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was planned, premeditated, and executed with professional skill. My sweet cookie-baking mother-in-law was apparently also an accomplished burglar. The lock clicked open and Margaret began photographing the contents of each file folder. Insurance policies, investment statements, the deed to our house, David's birth certificate. She was documenting everything that proved who we were and what we owned. The methodical nature of it suggested this wasn't about quick cash. This was identity theft on a massive scale. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Margaret wasn't just stealing our documents and belongings, she was replacing them. Each time she photographed something, she would slip an identical-looking document back into the folder. From my vantage point, I couldn't see the details, but the careful substitution suggested forgeries. She wasn't just stealing our identities, she was erasing them. I crept down another step, trying to get close enough to see the replacement documents clearly. That's when disaster struck. My foot found the one loose board I'd forgotten about, the one David kept meaning to fix. The creak was explosive in the silent house, reverberating like a gunshot. Margaret froze, her hands still in the filing cabinet. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly she turned toward the stairs. Our eyes met through the darkness, and I saw something in her expression that chilled me to the bone. There was no surprise, no shame, no embarrassment at being caught. Instead, there was cold calculation, as if she was rapidly assessing her options and my threat level. "Hello, Sarah," she said calmly, as if we'd run into each other at the grocery store. "You're up late." My mouth was too dry to respond. This wasn't the flustered reaction of someone caught in an embarrassing situation. This was the composure of someone who'd been prepared for this possibility. Margaret began, then stopped herself. She seemed to realize that any excuse would be ridiculous given the circumstances. Instead, she straightened up, closing the filing cabinet with a soft click. I suppose you saw everything. I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What are you doing in our house, Margaret? She tilted her head, studying me with an expression I'd never seen before. The warm, maternal smile I'd grown accustomed to was nowhere to be found. In its place was something cold and calculating, like a predator deciding whether its prey was worth the effort to chase. I'm solving a problem, she said simply. The question is, Sarah, are you going to be part of the solution, or part of the problem? The threat in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't David's loving mother anymore. This was someone else entirely. Someone who'd been wearing a mask for 3 years. Someone who'd been planning something far more complex than simple theft. I raised my phone, showing her the screen still recording our conversation. I've been filming you. Everything you've done tonight is documented. Margaret's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. Oh, sweet child. Do you really think this is the first time I've had to deal with unexpected complications? She reached into her jacket, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she was going for a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a device I didn't recognize, something small and electronic with blinking lights. She pointed it at me and pressed a button. My phone screen went black, completely dead, as if the battery had been instantly drained. Signal jammer, Margaret explained conversationally, kills all electronic devices within a 15-foot radius. Your video recording, gone. Your ability to call for help, also gone. She slipped the device back into her jacket. Now we can have a proper conversation. The casual way she neutralized my only advantage made it clear this wasn't her first time doing whatever this was. Margaret wasn't just stealing from us. She was running some kind of sophisticated operation. The sweet mother-in-law persona had been a cover for something much darker. What do you want? I managed to ask, my voice stronger now that the initial shock was wearing off. What I want, Margaret said, walking toward the base of the stairs, is for you to go back to bed and pretend this never happened. In the morning, David will get a call that I've had a medical emergency and need to move in with you for a while. You'll be supportive and loving, because that's what good daughters-in-law do. She was at the bottom of the stairs now, looking up at me with those cold eyes. In a few weeks, after I've had time to complete my work, I'll recover miraculously and move back to my own place. Your life will return to normal and no one gets hurt. And if I don't agree to that, I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear the answer. Margaret's smile was razor sharp. Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, Sarah, I know things about you, things David doesn't know, things that would hurt him very deeply if he found out. My heart stopped. What are you talking about? The accident last year, Margaret said softly. The one that wasn't really an accident, was it? The one where you were texting while driving and ran that red light? The one where a little girl ended up in the hospital? The world tilted beneath my feet. I'd never told anyone the truth about that accident. Not even David. The guilt had been eating me alive for months, but the legal settlement had required absolute silence. How could Margaret possibly know? I've been watching you for a long time, Sarah, longer than you know. I know about the settlement money you've been hiding. I know about the therapy sessions you think David doesn't know about. I know about the pills you've been taking, and the lies you've been telling. Each revelation was like a physical blow. Margaret had been investigating me, digging into my life with the thoroughness of a private detective. But why? The question isn't what I want, Margaret continued, her voice growing hard. The question is what you're willing to sacrifice to keep your secrets safe. Your marriage, your reputation, your freedom. I realized I was trapped on the stairs, caught between a woman who somehow knew my darkest secrets, and a husband who wouldn't wake up even if I screamed. Margaret had planned this perfectly, waiting until David was in his deepest sleep cycle, knowing exactly how long she had to work. You have until morning to decide, Margaret said, turning back toward the kitchen. I'll be finishing my work here. When David wakes up, you can either play your part, or you can watch your life fall apart. Your choice. As she walked away, I caught a glimpse of the documents she'd been replacing in our filing cabinet. They weren't just forgeries. They were death certificates. Mine and David, dated 6 months in the future. Margaret wasn't just stealing our identities, she was planning to erase us entirely. I sank down onto the step, my legs too weak to hold me up. This wasn't just theft or identity fraud. This was something much bigger, much more dangerous, and I was completely alone with a woman who'd been planning our deaths for months, possibly years. The only question now was whether I could find a way to stop her before morning came, or if I'd wake up tomorrow to find that Sarah and David Morrison had officially ceased to exist. As Margaret resumed her methodical work in the kitchen, humming softly under her breath, I realized that the woman I'd called Mom for 3 years had never existed at all. What was down there, carefully erasing our lives one document at a time, was something else entirely, something that was very, very good at making people disappear. 3 hours, that's how long I sat on those stairs, watching Margaret work with the efficiency of a professional. She moved through our house like she owned it, systematically photographing, copying and replacing documents with a precision that spoke of extensive planning. The death certificates weren't the only forgeries. She had an entire briefcase of replacement documents, each one designed to slowly erase our legal existence. By dawn, I had counted 17 different forged documents slipped into our files, new insurance policies, with different beneficiaries, altered bank account information, even a forged will that left everything to a charity I'd never heard of. Margaret wasn't just planning to kill us, she was ensuring that when we died, every asset we owned would disappear into accounts she controlled. When the first pale light crept through our kitchen windows, Margaret began packing up her equipment. The briefcase disappeared into her shopping bag, along with the USB drives containing copies of our digital lives. She moved to our security system panel, and did something that made the green light flash twice before returning to normal. "I've installed a small modification," she called softly toward the stairs, knowing I was still watching. "It will record everything that happens in this house and send it directly to me, every conversation, every phone call, every moment of your daily life. Consider it insurance." The casualness of her surveillance threat chilled me. Margaret had turned our home into a monitoring station, probably weeks or months ago. How many private moments had she already recorded? How many intimate conversations, between David and me, had she used to plan this operation? She shouldered her bag and walked toward the front door, pausing at the base of the stairs, one final time. "Remember, Sarah, my medical emergency happens in 3 hours. David will get a call from my doctor at exactly 9:30. You'll insist I come stay here immediately, and you'll be the loving, concerned daughter-in-law. Any deviation from this script, and your husband learns some very interesting facts about his wife's past." The front door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone in the violated sanctuary of our home. I waited another 10 minutes before creeping downstairs, needing to see the extent of the damage with my own eyes. Everything looked normal. That was the most terrifying part. Margaret had been so careful that David would wake up completely unaware that our lives had been systematically dismantled while he slept. I checked the filing cabinet for our insurance policies looked identical to the ones that had been there yesterday, but when I examined them closely under the kitchen light, I could see minute differences. The policy numbers were slightly altered. The beneficiary section had been replaced with microscopic precision. Without a side-by-side comparison with the originals, even an expert might miss the changes. The computer showed no signs of intrusion, but I knew Margaret had copied everything. Worse, she'd probably installed monitoring software that would track every keystroke. I was trapped in my own home, surrounded by digital surveillance that would report my every move to a woman planning my murder. My phone, still dead from Margaret's signal jammer, came back to life when I pressed the power button. Immediately it started buzzing with notifications, but I didn't dare check them. If Margaret could kill electronic devices remotely, she could probably monitor them just as easily. Every text, every call, every internet search could be feeding information directly to her. I needed help, but who could I trust? Margaret had demonstrated knowledge of my deepest secrets, suggesting her surveillance network extended far beyond our house. How long had she been watching me? What other private information had she gathered? The thought of calling the police terrified me. What if Margaret had anticipated that, and prepared some kind of evidence to discredit me? That's when I remembered something that gave me hope. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was a retired FBI agent, who'd moved in 6 months ago. We'd become friendly over garden conversations, and she'd mentioned consulting on cybersecurity cases. If anyone could help me understand what Margaret was doing, and how to stop it, it would be someone with federal law enforcement experience. But first, I needed to gather evidence. If Margaret could monitor our security system and computer, I needed to find proof she couldn't delete or manipulate. I crept upstairs to our bedroom closet, where David kept an old digital camera from his photography hobby, something offline that Margaret couldn't have compromised. David was still sleeping deeply, completely unaware that his world had been turned upside down. I studied his peaceful face, wondering how I could possibly explain this to him. Margaret wasn't just his mother, she was his anchor, his emotional safe harbor. Learning that she was planning to murder us would destroy him almost as much as the murder itself. Back downstairs, I began photographing everything Margaret had touched: the filing cabinet, the computer setup, the areas where she'd placed her equipment. I documented the exact positions of items in my purse, looking for anything that might have been moved or copied. Every detail could be crucial evidence if I managed to get law enforcement involved. That's when I found it, a small device I'd never seen before, attached to the underside of our kitchen island. It was barely the size of a quarter, with a tiny blinking light that would be invisible unless you knew where to look. Margaret had been listening to us for weeks, possibly months. Every conversation, every private moment, every plan we'd made, had been reported directly to her. The discovery made me physically ill. How many times had David and I discussed our future, our finances, our dreams, never knowing his mother was cataloging every word for some twisted purpose? The violation felt almost worse than the theft. Margaret had weaponized David's love against us, using his trust to gather intelligence for our destruction. I photographed the listening device from multiple angles, then left it in place. Removing it would alert Margaret that I'd found her surveillance network, and I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. Instead, I began searching for other devices, using the camera's flash to illuminate dark corners and hidden spaces. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Our house was completely compromised: listening devices in every room, tiny cameras hidden in decorative objects, motion sensors that would track our movements. Margaret had turned our home into a high-tech prison, monitoring our every breath while planning our death. The scope of the surveillance suggested this operation had been years in the making. Margaret hadn't simply decided to rob us on a whim. This was a long-term project, carefully planned and professionally executed. But what could David and I possibly have that was worth this level of effort and risk? At exactly 9:15 a.m., I heard David's phone ringing upstairs. Margaret's timing was perfect, as always. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, listening to David's groggy voice, answering what he thought was an emergency call about his beloved mother. "What? When did this happen?" David's voice carried the panic Margaret had calculated perfectly. "Yes, of course she can stay here, as long as she needs. I'll come get her right now." I heard him jumping out of bed, his feet hitting the floor with urgency. By the time he made it downstairs, I was standing in the kitchen with coffee already brewing, playing the role of the concerned wife who'd been awakened by his phone call. "Mom's in the hospital," David said, his face pale with worry. "Heart palpitations. They're releasing her this morning, but she can't be alone. She needs to stay with us for a few weeks while they monitor her condition." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily because he believed it completely. Margaret had crafted the perfect manipulation, using David's love and concern as weapons against us both. "Of course," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "She can have the guest room. I'll get it ready right now." David kissed my forehead gratefully. "I knew you'd understand. You're amazing, Sarah. Mom is so lucky to have you in her life." The irony was suffocating. Margaret was lucky to have me, all right, lucky to have such easy access to our home, our routines and our trust. As David rushed to shower and dress, I began preparing the guest room that would house the woman planning to murder us. While making the bed, I found another surveillance device hidden in the reading lamp. Margaret had been monitoring this room too, probably planning to record our private conversations about her condition. Every word of sympathy, every expression of concern would be ammunition for whatever final phase she had planned. I was folding towels when I heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the guest room window, I watched a black sedan with tinted windows park behind David's car. Two men in dark suits got out, followed by Margaret herself, now dressed in a hospital gown and carrying a small overnight bag. The men weren't paramedics or hospital staff, they moved with the precise coordination of professional security, scanning our neighborhood, and checking sight lines before allowing Margaret to exit the vehicle. Whatever operation she was running, it involved people with serious training and resources. I watched Margaret transform herself as she approached our front door. The cold, calculating woman from last night disappeared, replaced by a frail elderly patient, grateful for her family's support. The performance was flawless, complete with a slight tremor in her hands, and a breathless quality to her voice that would fool any medical professional. David met them at the door, his concern radiating as he helped his weakened mother inside. The two men carried her bags and what looked like medical equipment, playing their roles as concerned hospital staff. They spoke with David about medication schedules and follow-up appointments, handing him official-looking documents that were probably as forged as everything else Margaret had produced. "Mrs. Morrison will need complete rest and minimal stress," one of the men told David seriously. "Any disruption to her routine could trigger another episode. It's crucial that she feels safe and supported." The instruction was really a warning directed at me. Margaret was establishing the framework for her stay. Any objection I raised would be dismissed as potentially dangerous to her health. She'd created a situation where questioning her presence could literally be painted as attempted murder. After the men left, Margaret allowed David to help her to the guest room, playing up her weakness with Oscar-worthy performance. But as she passed me in the hallway, she caught my eye for just a moment. The look she gave me was pure triumph, the expression of a predator that had successfully entered the den. "Thank you so much for letting me stay, dear," Margaret said loudly enough for David to hear. "I know it's an imposition, but family is everything, isn't it?" "Of course, Mom," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear churning in my stomach. "You're always welcome here." As David fussed over getting Margaret settled, I excused myself to run errands, the first step in my plan to contact Mrs. Chen without triggering Margaret's surveillance network. But as I reached for my car keys, Margaret called out from the guest room, "Sarah, dear, could you pick up my prescription while you're out? The hospital pharmacy gave me the wrong dosage." She handed me a slip of paper with an address I didn't recognize. "This pharmacy specializes in cardiac medications. They'll have exactly what I need." The address was across town, a round trip that would take at least 2 hours. Margaret was ensuring I'd be away from the house long enough for her to complete whatever setup she had planned, but it also gave me an opportunity to reach out for help without being monitored. "Of course," I said, taking the paper. "I'll head out right now." As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Margaret in the guest room window. She was no longer playing the frail patient. Instead, she was on her phone speaking rapidly to someone while watching my car disappear down the street. The pharmacy address led me to a medical complex on the outskirts of town. When I walked inside, the pharmacist looked confused when I handed him Margaret's prescription request. "I'm sorry," he said, checking his computer. "We don't have any patient named Margaret Morrison in our system, and this medication, it's not for heart palpitations. It's a powerful sedative, the kind used for surgical procedures." My blood turned to ice. Margaret hadn't sent me to pick up heart medication. She'd sent me to collect the drugs she planned to use to incapacitate David and me before carrying out whatever final phase she had planned. "There must be some mistake," I managed to say, backing away from the counter. "Ma'am, are you all right?" the pharmacist asked, clearly concerned by my expression. I ran from the pharmacy, my mind racing as I drove toward Mrs. Chen's house. Margaret wasn't just planning to kill us, she was planning to do it tonight. The sedatives, the surveillance, the perfect alibi of being a sick patient in our home. She was going to drug us, make it look like a home invasion or accident, and disappear with our identities and assets. Miss Chen was working in her garden when I pulled up, her experienced eyes immediately recognizing distress when she saw it.
"Sarah? What's wrong, dear?"
"I need help," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone is trying to kill my husband and me, and I think they're going to do it tonight." Mrs. Chen's demeanor shifted instantly, the friendly neighbor disappearing as the federal agent took over. "Come inside, tell me everything." As I poured out the story of Margaret's midnight visit, the surveillance devices, the forged documents, and the sedatives, Mrs. Chen listened with the intensity of someone who'd heard similar stories before. "This isn't random," she said when I finished. Your mother-in-law is running a sophisticated identity theft operation, probably part of a larger criminal network. The question is, why target you specifically? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Mom took a turn for the worse. Come home immediately. Mrs. Chen saw the message and her expression hardened. That's the signal. They're moving to the final phase tonight. What do I do? I asked, terror making my voice small. Mrs. Chen was already reaching for her phone. We call in the cavalry, and then we save your husband's life. As she dialed a number that would bring federal agents to our suburban neighborhood, I realized that Margaret had made one critical mistake. She'd assumed I would be isolated, helpless, and alone. She was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. Chen's fingers flew across her phone as she contacted what she called active assets in the field. Within minutes, she'd connected with Agent Rodriguez from the local FBI field office, speaking in the clipped, professional language of someone who'd spent decades in federal law enforcement. We have a code silver situation, Mrs. Chen said into her phone. Identity theft operation with imminent threat to civilian lives. Suspects are armed, organized and moving to execution phase tonight. While she coordinated the response, I sat in her kitchen, my hands shaking as the reality of our situation crystallized. Margaret wasn't just some deranged mother-in-law with boundary issues. She was the center of a criminal operation sophisticated enough to forge government documents, install professional-grade surveillance equipment, and coordinate what appeared to be contract killings. How long do we have? I asked when Mrs. Chen ended her call. Rodriguez is mobilizing a tactical team, but they're 40 minutes out, she replied grimly. Your text from David suggests they're not waiting that long. Mrs. Chen pulled out a laptop and began typing rapidly. I'm accessing the federal database to run background checks on Margaret Morrison. If she's part of an organized operation, there should be. She stopped mid-sentence, her face paling as information populated her screen. What is it? Margaret Morrison died 3 years ago, Mrs. Chen said slowly. The real Margaret Morrison, David's actual mother, died in a car accident 2 weeks before you met David. The woman in your house is someone else entirely. The room spun around. For 3 years I'd been living with, talking to, sharing family dinners with a complete stranger who'd been impersonating David's dead mother. The holidays, the birthday celebrations, the intimate family moments, all of it had been an elaborate lie. But David would have known, I protest. He would have recognized that she wasn't his mother. Mrs. Chen's expression was grim as she pulled up more files. Look at this medical report. The real Margaret Morrison had extensive plastic surgery just before her death, reconstructive work after a previous accident. The woman impersonating her would only need to match the post-surgical appearance. She clicked through more documents, her frown deepening. There's more. The real Margaret had early-stage Alzheimer's. David might have attributed any personality changes to her condition, especially if the imposter was skilled at manipulation. Who is she then? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Mrs. Chen's fingers paused over the keyboard. I'm running facial recognition through known criminal databases. This might take a few minutes, but her computer chimed with a match. The file that opened made my blood freeze. The woman I'd known as Margaret Morrison was actually Elena Vasquez, a former intelligence operative, turned freelance criminal specializing in long-term identity theft operations. Her rap sheet included multiple murders, millions in stolen assets, and connections to international crime syndicates. She's what we call a family infiltrator, Mrs. Chen explained, reading through Elena's profile. She targets wealthy couples, replaces a family member, and spends years gathering intelligence before executing elaborate theft and murder schemes. You and David aren't her first victim. The files showed a pattern spanning 15 years. Elena would research families, identify vulnerable entry points, and assume the identity of deceased relatives. She'd spend months or years building trust and gathering information before striking. Her previous victims had all died in apparent accidents or home invasions, their assets disappearing into offshore accounts before anyone realized what had happened. The real question, Mrs. Chen said, closing the laptop, is why she chose you and David specifically. Her previous targets were all significantly wealthier. Before I could respond, my phone rang. David's contact photo filled the screen, a happy picture from our last anniversary dinner, back when I thought we were just a normal couple with normal problems. You have to answer, Miss Chen said urgently. Act natural but try to get information about where he is in the house and whether he's alone. I accepted the call, my voice surprisingly steady. Hi honey. I'm just picking up your mom's prescription now. Sarah, thank God. David's voice was strained with panic. Mom collapsed again. She's barely conscious and she's asking for you specifically. How far away are you? In the background I could hear Elena's voice, weak and thready, calling my name. The performance was flawless. She sounded exactly like someone in medical distress. I'm about 20 minutes away, I said, catching Mrs. Chen's sharp nod of approval. Should I call an ambulance? She won't let me, David replied. She keeps saying she just needs her medication and to see you. She's saying strange things. Sarah, talking about making sure we're both safe, about people who want to hurt us. I think her condition is affecting her memory. Elena was setting the stage for her final act, planting paranoid delusions that would explain away any evidence of the real conspiracy she was orchestrating. When David and I turned up dead, he'd have told emergency responders about his mother's concerns about mysterious threats, the perfect misdirection from the actual killer. I'll be right there, I said. Keep her calm, and don't let her exert herself. Hurry, David pleaded before hanging up. Mrs. Chen was already moving, pulling equipment from various cabinets. She's accelerating the timeline because you're not there to drug alongside David. The tactical team is still 30 minutes out, which means we're going in alone. I stared at her. This isn't your case anymore. Child, I spent 25 years tracking people like Elena Vasquez, Mrs. Chen replied, checking a pistol with practiced efficiency. I'm not about to let her murder innocent people in my neighborhood. She handed me a small device that looked like a garage door opener. Emergency beacon. If things go wrong, press the red button. It'll send our exact location to every federal agent within 50 miles. As we walked to her car, Mrs. Chen outlined our plan. We can't go in directly. Elena will have surveillance monitoring all approaches to your house, but I know these suburban layouts. There's a storm drain that runs behind your neighborhood. We can use it to get close without being detected. The storm drain was exactly as dark and claustrophobic as it sounded. We crawled through 3 feet of concrete pipe for what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. Miss Chen navigated by memory and a small tactical flashlight, counting drainage grates until we reached the one behind our house. Through the metal grating, I could see our backyard and the guest room window where Elena was supposedly recovering from her cardiac episode. The room was dark, but I could make out movement, shadows that suggested at least 2 people inside. Mrs. Chen used a small tool to quietly remove the drainage grate, and we climbed into our own backyard like burglars. The irony wasn't lost on me. Breaking into my own home to save my husband from his fake mother. Stay behind me, Mrs. Chen whispered as we approached the house. Elena is highly trained. One mistake and we're both dead. We crept along the side of the house, staying below the window. Through the kitchen window I could see David pacing anxiously, his phone in his hand. He kept looking toward the guest room, clearly worried about Elena's condition. Mrs. Chen pointed to the basement window, our entry point. She produced another tool, working the lock with the same efficiency Elena had shown with our filing cabinet. Within seconds we were inside our own basement, surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations and David's exercise equipment. The house above us was quiet, but Mrs. Chen held up her hand, listening intently. After a moment, she pointed upward and mouthed 2 voices. Elena wasn't alone. At least one of her accomplices was still in the house, probably the men who'd posed as hospital staff. We crept up the basement stairs, each step a potential betrayal. At the top, Mrs. Chen peered through the crack under the door, then slowly opened it into our kitchen. The space was empty, but I could hear David's voice coming from the living room. Mom, please try to rest. Sarah will be here soon with your medication. Elena's response was barely audible, the perfect imitation of someone barely clinging to consciousness. David, honey, I need to tell you something important. About Sarah, about the accident. My heart stopped. Elena was going to expose my secret before killing us, destroying David's image of me as her final act of cruelty. Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm, her grip like steel. Through hand signals she indicated that I should stay in the kitchen while she moved toward the living room. But before either of us could act, we heard footsteps on the stairs, someone coming down from the second floor. We pressed ourselves against the kitchen island as one of Elena's accomplices appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He was carrying what looked like medical equipment, but Miss Chen's sharp intake of breath told me it was something far more sinister. The man walked past the kitchen entrance without seeing us, heading toward the living room where David was tending to his fake mother. Through the doorway, I watched him set up what appeared to be an IV stick. "The medication is ready," he announced in a voice I recognized from the morning's performance. "This should help stabilize her condition." Mrs. Chen's hand moved to her weapon, but the angle was wrong. Any shot she took risked hitting David, who was now standing directly between us and Elena's accomplice. That's when I heard Elena's voice, stronger now, dropping the pretense of illness. "David, I need you to trust me completely. Sarah isn't who you think she is." "What do you mean?" David's voice carried confusion and growing alarm. "The accident last year," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with each revelation. "She wasn't the victim. She was the one who ran the red light. She put a little girl in the hospital and covered it up." David's sharp intake of breath was audible from the kitchen. "Elena was destroying my marriage as methodically as she'd stolen our identities, ensuring that David's last memories of me would be tainted with betrayal." "That's impossible," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sarah would have told me, would she?" Elena's voice was cold now, no longer bothering with the maternal warmth she'd maintained for 3 years. "Would she tell you about the settlement money she's been hiding? About the therapy sessions she attends under a false name? About the pills she takes to deal with the guilt?" Each revelation was a calculated blow, designed to isolate David and make him question everything he thought he knew about his wife. Elena had been gathering ammunition for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. Mrs. Chen made a decision. She stepped into the doorway, her weapon trained on Elena's accomplice. "Federal agent, drop your weapons and step away from the civilians." The explosion of movement that followed happened in seconds but felt like hours. Elena's accomplice spun toward Miss Chen, reaching for a weapon hidden in his medical bag. David stumbled backward in shock, finally seeing the IV equipment for what it really was, a drug delivery system designed to incapacitate him. Elena herself moved with the fluid grace of someone with military training, rolling off the couch and behind an armchair in one smooth motion. From her new position, she had a clear line of sight to both Mrs. Chen and David. Elena called out, her voice now carrying a slight accent I'd never heard before. "Your wife brought an armed intruder into our home. She's trying to silence me before I can tell you the truth about who she really is." David's face was a mask of confusion and terror, caught between his love for me and 3 years of trust in the woman he thought was his mother. Elena had calculated this moment perfectly, ensuring that even federal intervention would appear to support her narrative. Miss Chen kept her weapon trained on Elena's accomplice, but I could see the tactical nightmare she was facing. 2 armed suspects, 1 civilian in the line of fire, and Elena positioned behind cover with multiple escape routes. "David," I called out from the kitchen, abandoning any pretense of hiding. "That woman isn't your mother. Your real mother died 3 years ago. Her name is Elena Vasquez, and she's been planning to kill us both." The silence that followed was deafening. David looked between the armed standoff in his living room and my voice from the kitchen, his world collapsing as he tried to process revelations that challenged everything he believed about his life. Elena laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Clever girl, but you're too late." That's when I noticed the smell, sweet and chemical like almonds. Elena had already released something into the air, some kind of aerosol that was making my head feel light and dizzy. Mrs. Chen noticed it too, her training recognizing the signs of chemical weapons deployment. "Gas mask," she shouted, but it was too late. The chemical was already in our systems, and Elena had planned for this contingency too. As my vision started to blur, I saw Elena rise from behind the armchair, no longer bothering to hide the pistol in her hand. David was swaying on his feet, the chemical affecting him faster due to his larger size. "Don't worry," Elena said, her voice seeming to come from far away. "You won't feel anything. The chemical will make you unconscious, and when they find your bodies tomorrow, it will look like a home invasion gone wrong. Your assets will disappear into accounts that have been waiting for years." Miss Chen was fighting the effects of the chemical, but even her federal training couldn't overcome the sophisticated drug Elena had deployed. Her weapon wavered in her hand as she struggled to maintain consciousness. Elena walked toward David, who was now unconscious on the floor. "You were both so easy to manipulate," she said, conversationally. David, desperate for maternal love after losing his real mother, Sarah, terrified of having her secrets exposed. 3 years of playing house, and you never suspected a thing. As the chemical pulled me toward unconsciousness, I heard sirens in the distance. The tactical team was finally arriving, but Elena had timed everything perfectly. By the time they breached the house, she'd be gone, and we'd be dead. Elena heard the sirens too, her head tilting as she calculated distances and response times. "Earlier than expected," she murmured, "but still manageable." She pulled out her phone and sent a rapid text. Within seconds I heard engines starting outside, escape vehicles that had been waiting for exactly this scenario. "Goodbye, Sarah," Elena said, raising her pistol toward my fading consciousness. "You put up more of a fight than most." But as the darkness closed in, I heard something that gave me hope. The emergency beacon Mrs. Chen had given me was still in my pocket, and my fumbling fingers found the red button. The signal that went out would bring more than just local law enforcement. It would bring federal agents, tactical teams, and the kind of resources Elena hadn't planned for. As consciousness slipped away, my last thought was a prayer that it wouldn't be too late. The emergency beacon's signal pierced through the chemical haze in my mind like a lifeline. Even as consciousness slipped away, I could hear the distant thunder of helicopters approaching our suburban neighborhood. Mrs. Chen's federal contacts weren't just sending local backup, they were deploying the kind of resources reserved for major terrorism threats. Through my fading awareness, I heard Elena's sharp curse as she recognized the sound. Multiple aircraft meant federal air support, probably including surveillance drones that could track her escape vehicles. Her carefully planned exit strategy was crumbling in real time. Team 2, abort and scatter. Elena spoke rapidly into her phone, switching to what sounded like Russian. "Federal air assets, inbound, execute Protocol 7, Protocol 7, even through the chemical fog." Those words sent ice through my veins. Miss Chen had mentioned that Elena's previous operations had always ended with the complete elimination of witnesses. If her escape was compromised, she'd ensure no one survived to testify against her. Elena's accomplice moved with renewed urgency, pulling what looked like explosive devices from his medical bag. They weren't just planning to kill us anymore, they were going to destroy the entire house and any evidence of their operation. But Elena had underestimated Mrs. Chen's federal training. Even semi-conscious, the retired agent was still fighting the chemical's effects through sheer willpower and decades of conditioning. I watched through blurred vision as she managed to key her radio with trembling fingers. "Air support, this is Chen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Suspects have explosives. Repeat, explosives in play. Fast entry required." The response was immediate. The helicopter noise shifted, becoming more focused and directional. Through our front windows, I could see spotlights piercing the darkness. As aircraft took positions around our house, Elena's escape routes were being systematically cut off. Elena fired 3 quick shots through the living room window, not at the aircraft but at the streetlight. The neighborhood plunged into darkness as she activated night vision equipment she'd apparently hidden throughout our house. She was turning our home into a fortress, using our own floor plan against the federal response team. "David Morrison and Sarah Morrison are federal assets," Elena announced into her radio, loud enough for any surveillance equipment to pick up. "They've been working undercover to infiltrate my organization. Their deaths will be considered an act of patriotic justice." The lie was sophisticated and dangerous. By claiming we were federal agents, Elena was providing justification for our murders, while simultaneously making the response team more cautious about collateral damage. Every tactic she employed revealed years of training in counterintelligence operations. A new voice crackled through Mrs. Chen's radio. Agent Rodriguez, commanding the tactical response. All units. Suspects are using advanced psychological warfare tactics. Disregard any claims about asset status. Primary mission is civilian rescue. Elena's head snapped toward Mrs. Chen's position, her night vision equipment revealing the radio transmission. In one fluid motion, she raised her pistol toward the retired agent, but the chemical she'd deployed was affecting her coordination too. The shot went wide, splintering our coffee table instead of finding its target. That miss saved all our lives. The gunshot gave the federal snipers positioned outside a clear target acquisition. 3 red laser dots appeared on Elena's chest as she scrambled for new cover. Her tactical advantage suddenly reversed. Elena Vasquez, Agent Rodriguez's voice boomed through a megaphone. This is the FBI. You are surrounded. Release the hostages and surrender immediately. Elena's laugh was bitter as she crouched behind our kitchen island, the same place I'd hidden earlier when this nightmare began. Agent Rodriguez, I assume your reputation precedes you. Tell me, how many federal operations have you compromised by arriving too late? She was trying to provoke an emotional response to make Rodriguez act rashly, but the federal commander's training held firm. Ms. Vasquez, we know about your previous operation. We know about the Hendersons in Miami, the Castellis in Phoenix, the Yamadas in Seattle. Your pattern ends tonight. The mention of those names hit Elena like physical blows. Those were her previous victims, families whose murders had been attributed to random home invasions or accidents. The federal government had been tracking her far longer than she'd realized. You know nothing, Elena snarled, but her voice carried a note of panic now. I am a ghost. I leave no traces. Actually, Mrs. Chen managed to say from her position on the floor, her voice stronger as the chemical's effects began to wear off. You made one critical mistake 3 years ago. Elena's night vision goggles swiveled toward Mrs. Chen, but she didn't dare expose herself to the sniper sights by moving closer. What mistake? You kept David alive, Mrs. Chen explained, using the conversation to buy time for the tactical teams to position themselves. Every other operation, you eliminated the entire family, but you needed David to maintain your cover identity. That deviation from your pattern is what allowed us to connect the cases. Through my returning consciousness, I could see Elena processing this information. Her perfect murder spree had been compromised by the one element of humanity she'd allowed into her operation, her attachment to the role of David's mother. That's when the explosions began, not from Elena's devices, but from federal breaching charge. The tactical teams were coming in through multiple entry points simultaneously: front door, back door, basement windows, even through the roof. Elena's fortress was being overrun from all directions. Elena's accomplice tried to activate the explosive devices, but Mrs. Chen had managed to crawl close enough to interfere. The two struggled over the detonator as federal agents poured into our house like a black-clad tide. David, I managed to croak, my voice returning as the chemical's effects continued to fade. Behind the couch, a federal medic reached David first, checking his pulse and starting to administer what looked like a chemical antidote. Other agents were sweeping the house for additional suspects and explosive devices, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness Elena had created. Elena herself was trapped in our kitchen, surrounded by agents but still armed and dangerous. She held her pistol to her own head, using the threat of suicide to maintain control of the situation. One more step, and I pull the trigger, she warned. You'll never learn about the network, never find the other operations in progress, never save the families who are being targeted right now. Agent Rodriguez appeared in the kitchen doorway, his weapon lowered but ready. We already know about the network, Elena. We've been tracking your organization for 2 years. The Kozlov brothers in New York, the Chen Syndicate in Los Angeles, the Morrison cell in Denver. Yes, they took your new identity's surname as their cover. Each revelation hit Elena like a hammer blow. The federal investigation was far more comprehensive than she'd imagined. Her entire criminal empire was being rolled up while she was trapped in our kitchen. The Morrison cell was your mistake,
Rodriguez continued, his voice calm and professional. When you assumed Margaret Morrison's identity, you inadvertently connected yourself to a criminal organization we'd already penetrated. Every move you've made for 3 years has been monitored. Elena's face contorted with rage and disbelief. Impossible. I chose the Morrison identity randomly. I researched the family for months. You researched the public records, Rodriguez agreed, but you missed the classified files. The real Margaret Morrison was already under federal surveillance as a suspected money launderer. When she died and you took her place, you inherited that surveillance. The psychological impact was devastating. Elena's perfect plan, her meticulous preparation, her years of patient identity theft, all of it had been built on a foundation of federal observation. She hadn't been the predator stalking us. She'd been the prey walking into a trap. The surveillance equipment you found in this house, Mrs. Chen added, now sitting up with medical assistants, half of it was yours, the other half was ours. We've been watching you watch them. Elena's pistol wavered, as the full scope of her situation became clear. 3 years of her life, countless hours of planning, millions of dollars in preparation, all wasted on an operation the federal government had been documenting from the beginning. That momentary distraction was all the tactical team needed. A sniper's bullet shattered our kitchen window, followed immediately by a flashbang grenade that disoriented Elena completely. Federal agents were on her before she could recover, restraining her with professional efficiency. Elena Vasquez, Agent Rodriguez announced formally, you are under arrest for multiple counts of murder, identity theft, fraud, and terrorism. You have the right to remain silent. As Elena was read her rights and led away in restraints, federal crime scene technicians began processing our house with the thoroughness of archaeologists. Every surveillance device, every forged document, every piece of evidence Elena had thought was helping her commit the perfect crime was now being catalogued as proof of her guilt. David was conscious now, sitting on our couch with an oxygen mask as paramedics monitored his recovery from the chemical exposure. His eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the questions there about Margaret's true identity, about my hidden secrets, about everything Elena had revealed before her capture. The woman you knew as your mother, Agent Rodriguez explained to David gently, was Elena Vasquez, a former Russian intelligence operative turned freelance criminal. She's wanted in connection with at least 12 family murders across the United States. Your real mother, Margaret Morrison, died in a car accident 3 years ago. David's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, horror, grief for the mother he'd lost without knowing it, and anger at the deception that had defined our marriage. When he looked at me again, I saw something else: the need for truth between us. A federal victim advocate sat with us as the full scope of Elena's operation was explained. The identity theft, the financial manipulation, the systematic replacement of our legal documents. It would take months to untangle the damage she'd done to our lives. There is some good news, Agent Rodriguez added. Vasquez's operation was primarily focused on intelligence gathering and asset positioning. She hadn't yet transferred any significant amounts from your accounts. Most of your financial losses can be recovered. Miss Chen, now fully recovered and back in her element as a federal consultant, pulled up files on her laptop. Elena's network specialized in long-term infiltration operations. They would spend years integrating into families, gathering intelligence, and preparing for massive coordinated theft. You and David were targeted as part of a larger operation involving 37 families across 12 states. The scope was staggering. Elena hadn't just been planning to murder us. We were part of an industrial-scale identity theft operation that would have devastated dozens of families simultaneously. Thanks to your emergency beacon, and Miss Chan's quick thinking, Rodriguez continued, we were able to prevent the activation of the network's final phase. Arrests are being made across the country as we speak. As dawn broke over our neighborhood, our house looked like the scene of a military operation. Federal vehicles filled our street, crime scene tape surrounded our property, and investigators continued documenting 3 years of systematic surveillance and planning.
David finally spoke, his voice hoarse from the chemical exposure. The woman I called Mom for 3 years. None of it was real? The relationship you felt was real, the victim advocate assured him. Elena Vasquez was highly trained in psychological manipulation. She studied your real mother's personality, your family dynamics, your emotional needs. The care you felt from her was genuine, even if her motives weren't. I reached for David's hand, expecting him to pull away given everything Elena had revealed about my past. Instead, he gripped it tightly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said simply. "About everything. But first, I need you to know whatever secrets you've been carrying, whatever mistakes you think you've made. I love." Elena tried to use your past to destroy us, but she failed. Agent Rodriguez cleared his throat diplomatically. "You'll both need to provide extensive statements over the next few days. Elena's network is fighting the arrests, and your testimony will be crucial for prosecution. But for now, you should focus on recovering from this ordeal." As the federal teams began packing up their equipment, Mrs. Chen approached us with a slight smile. "You know, in 25 years of federal service, I've never seen a case where the criminals made it so easy for us." Elena documented everything, recorded every conversation, monitored every move, all of which is now evidence against her. Her surveillance system became her downfall, I realized. Exactly, she was so focused on controlling information that she created a perfect record of her own crimes. The irony is beautiful. As we watched Elena being loaded into a federal transport vehicle, her calm facade had finally cracked. The professional killer who'd spent 3 years playing the role of a loving mother was now just another criminal being processed through the justice system. "What happens now?" David asked. Agent Rodriguez handed us a business card. "Now you rebuild. Elena's operation is finished, her network is dismantled, and you're both safe. The federal government will provide support for identity restoration and counseling services. In 6 months, this will all be behind you." But as I looked at our house, still full of crime scene technicians and federal investigators, I knew that while we were safe, the real work of recovery was just beginning. We had a marriage to rebuild, secrets to address, and a future to reclaim from the woman who'd tried to steal everything from us. 6 weeks after Elena's arrest, David and I sat in the sterile conference room of the federal building downtown, preparing for what Agent Rodriguez called the revelation session. The walls were lined with evidence boxes, 3 years of Elena's surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and documented crimes that would take prosecutors months to fully catalog. "Before we begin the formal deposition," Rodriguez said, settling into his chair across from us, "there are some things about Elena's operation that you need to understand, things that will help explain not just what happened to you, but why you were chosen as target." David's hand found mine under the table. In the weeks since Elena's arrest, we'd begun the painful process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. I'd told him everything about the car accident, the settlement money, the therapy sessions I'd hid. He'd shared his own secrets, his grief over losing his real mother, his suspicions about Margaret's changed behavior that he'd dismissed as normal aging, his guilt over not protecting me from someone I'd trusted. "Elena Vasquez wasn't just a criminal," Rodriguez continued, opening the first evidence box. "She was a former GRU operative, Russian military intelligence, who defected in 2009 after a botched assassination attempt in Prague. The identity theft operation was just her cover. Her real mission was industrial espionage on a massive scale." Mrs. Chen, now serving as an official federal consultant on the case, pulled out a thick folder. Elena's network wasn't randomly targeting wealthy families. They were specifically going after people connected to defense contractors, technology companies, and government agencies. "Sarah, your freelance consulting work included projects for 3 different defense contractors over the past 2 years." I felt David's grip tight, but I never told Margaret about my work. "Those contracts required security clearances." "You didn't have to tell her," Rodriguez replied grimly. "Elena had been monitoring your computer and phone communications since the day she moved into David's life. Every email, every document, every conversation, it was all being transmitted to Moscow in real time." He opened a laptop and played a recorded conversation I recognized with horrifying clarity. It was me, 6 months ago, discussing a classified satellite navigation project with my project manager. The call had been made from our home office, while Elena was supposedly napping in the guest room during one of her early health scares. The settlement money from your car accident, Miss Chen added, consulting her notes. Elena knew about it because she'd been monitoring your bank accounts since but she also knew something else. The accident wasn't your fault. David turned to stare at me. What do you mean? Rodriguez pulled out another file, this one marked with FBI evidence tags. Elena had access to traffic camera footage that was never released to the public. Sarah, the car that hit you ran the red light, not you. Your insurance company and the other driver's lawyers suppressed the evidence because it would have resulted in a massive lawsuit against them. The room spun around me. For over a year I'd been carrying guilt for an accident that wasn't my fault, taking medication for anxiety caused by a lie, attending therapy for trauma that had been deliberately inflicted by corporate cover-up. Elena knew this, Rodriguez continued. She used your manufactured guilt as a control mechanism. Every time you started to question her behavior or get suspicious, she'd make subtle references to the accident, reinforcing your belief that you were hiding something shameful. Ms. Chen opened another evidence box, this one containing audio equipment. We found recordings of Elena practicing conversations with you, Sarah. She would rehearse responses to potential questions, perfecting the maternal tone and mannerisms that made you trust her. She studied hours of video of David's real mother to perfect the impersonation. They played a chilling recording of Elena alone in our guest room, practicing different ways to say, "How was your day, dear?" and "You're such a good daughter-in-law." Each repetition was slightly different, as she fine-tuned her performance like an actress preparing for the role of her life. David, Rodriguez said gently, we need to discuss your real mother's death. Elena didn't just randomly choose to impersonate her. Margaret Morrison's accident was arranged. The color drained from David's face. You're saying Elena killed my mother? We believe so, though proving it will be difficult. Margaret's car accident occurred 2 weeks after she discovered irregular charges on her credit card, charges Elena had been making to establish a financial history in her name. Your mother was getting suspicious and had contacted her bank to investigate. Ms. Chen pulled out accident reconstruction photos that made my stomach turn. Elena had been monitoring Margaret's phone calls. When she learned that your mother was investigating the identity theft, she arranged the car accident to look like a one-vehicle crash caused by a medical episode. David's voice was barely a whisper. She murdered my mother to take her place, and then she waited 2 weeks before recovering from her own supposed medical treatment and reaching out to you. Rodriguez confirmed. The timing allowed her to explain any personality changes as trauma from the accident. The scope of Elena's planning was staggering. She hadn't just stolen someone's identity, she'd committed murder to obtain it, then manipulated David's grief to gain access to our lives. There's more, Ms. Chen said reluctantly. Elena's network had identified you as a target before your mother's death, David. Your job at Morrison Defense Systems, the irony of the name wasn't lost on her, gave her access to classified contract information through you. David worked for a mid-level defense contractor, nothing that would normally attract international attention, but apparently his access to certain project files made him valuable to Russian intelligence. Elena spent 3 years gathering information through both of you, Rodriguez explained. Sarah's consulting work gave her access to cutting-edge satellite technology. David's position provided insight into drone navigation systems. Combined, the intelligence Elena collected was worth millions to foreign governments. They showed us printouts of encrypted transmissions Elena had sent to contacts in Moscow, technical specifications, project timelines, budget allocations, 3 years of American defense secrets, funneled through our home to Russian intelligence services. The identity theft operation was almost secondary, Mrs. Chen noted. Elena's real value to her handlers was the intelligence she was gathering. The plan to steal your assets and kill you was just her exit strategy. When the intelligence gathering was complete, Rodriguez pulled out Elena's personal journals, translated from Russian. According to her notes, Elena was planning to retire your identities in 6 months. She'd gathered enough intelligence to satisfy her Moscow contacts, and the financial theft would have funded her next operation. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. 3 years. She was in our home for 3 years, pretending to love me while planning to kill us both. David, I said softly, but he held up a hand. I let her into our lives. I gave her a key to our house. I told her about Sarah's work, about our finances, about everything. His voice was thick with self-recrimination. Rodriguez closed the evidence files. David, Elena Vasquez was a professional intelligence operative with decades of training and psychological manipulation. She didn't succeed because you made mistakes. She succeeded because she was very, very good at what she did. Mrs. Chen added. The federal investigation revealed that Elena's network had successfully infiltrated 43 families over the past 8 years. You and Sarah were the first ones to discover the operation and survive it. That afternoon, we were shown to Elena's holding cell for a controlled confrontation that the prosecution needed for their case. Elena sat behind reinforced glass, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look smaller and more ordinary than the terrifying figure from our home. When she saw us, Elena smiled with genuine warmth, the same maternal expression I'd seen thousands of times over 3 years. Even knowing everything, the manipulation was so perfect that part of me still wanted to trust her. Sarah, darling, Elena said through the intercom, her voice carrying the same affectionate tone she'd used when asking about my day. You look tired. Are you sleeping well? The casual concern was so natural, so perfectly crafted, that David actually stepped back from the glass. Why? I managed to ask. Why did you choose us? Elena tilted her head with what looked like genuine confusion. Choose you? Sweet child, I didn't choose you. You were assigned to me. Rodriguez leaned forward. What do you mean, assigned? Sarah Morrison, freelance consultant with security clearance for defense projects. David Morrison, systems analyst at Morrison Defense Systems. The coincidence in names made you irresistible to my handlers. Elena's smile never wavered. When they learned that David's mother was already under federal surveillance for money laundering, you became the perfect operational target. She looked directly at David. Your real mother, by the way, was never a money launderer. The federal surveillance was based on false information I provided through intermediaries. I needed her to appear suspicious so that when I replaced her, the surveillance would continue without question. The revelation hit David like a physical blow. Elena had orchestrated even that, using federal resources to validate her own operation, and the car accident that wasn't Sarah's fault. Elena continued conversationally. I arranged for the suppression of that evidence. A few well-placed bribes to insurance investigators, some pressure on the traffic camera operators. It was important that Sarah carry guilt she could never discuss. Guilty people are so much easier to control. Rodriguez made notes rapidly. So you manufactured Sarah's trauma specifically for psychological manipulation? Of course, Elena replied, as if it were obvious. Trauma creates dependency. Sarah needed therapy, which I recommended. She needed anxiety medication, which I suggested. She needed someone to confide in, someone who would never judge her. Who better than her loving mother-in-law? The clinical precision of her manipulation was horrifying. Elena had created my psychological problems specifically to make me vulnerable to her influence. The real tragedy, Elena said, focusing on David again, is that I genuinely grew fond of you both. In my previous operations, the families were just targets, but you, David, you reminded me of my own son. And Sarah, you were so earnest in your desire to be a good daughter-in-law. David's voice was harsh. You killed my real mother. I eliminated a security risk, Elena corrected. Margaret Morrison was becoming suspicious of financial irregularities. She had to be neutralized before she could compromise the operation. She was my mother. Elena's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Yes, and she loved you very much. I studied hours of video footage to understand how she expressed that love. Every hug I gave you, every meal I cooked, every time I told you I was proud of you, all of it was based on careful observation of how your real mother treated you. The twisted logic was almost more horrible than outright cruelty. Elena had weaponized David's grief, using his own mother's love as a template for manipulation. The defense information you gathered, Rodriguez pressed. What was it used for? Elena shrugged. That's classified above my security level. I was simply a collector. What Moscow did with the intelligence was not my concern. Mrs. Chen consulted her notes. We've identified several defense projects that were compromised during your operation: satellite guidance systems, drone navigation protocols, encrypted communication network. The damage to national security is still being assessed. I'm sure it's significant, Elena replied with pride. I was very thorough in my work. As we prepared to leave the holding facility, Elena called out one final time. Sarah, David, I want you to know that the affection you felt from me wasn't entirely manufactured. In my own way, within the constraints of my mission, I did care about you both. David turned back to face her. If you cared about us, why were you planning to kill us? Elena's smile was sad and genuine. Because caring about targets is a professional liability, emotional attachment, compromises, operational effectiveness. Killing you would have been the most difficult part of the mission, but it was necessary for my survival. Walking out of the federal building, David and I were both silent. The woman who'd been the center of our family life for 3 years had just calmly explained how she'd murdered his mother, manipulated our emotions, stolen state secrets, and planned our deaths, all while expressing what seemed like genuine affection for us. How do we come back from this? David asked as we reached our car. I thought about everything we'd learned, all the lies that had shaped our marriage, all the manufactured guilt and artificial trauma that had defined our relationship. We start over, I said finally. We tell each other the truth about everything, no matter how painful. We build something real this time. David nodded, then surprised me by laughing bitterly. You know what the strangest part is? I actually miss her, even knowing everything. Part of me misses the woman I thought was my mother. That's because the love you felt was real, I realized. Elena may have been manipulating us, but the emotions she triggered were genuine. She didn't create fake feelings, she exploited real ones. As we drove home to the house that was finally secure, finally private, finally ours again, I thought about the strange alchemy of deception and truth that had defined our lives for 3 years. Elena Vasquez had built her operation on lies, but in the process, she'd forced David and me to confront deeper truths about ourselves, our relationship, and our capacity for forgiveness. The federal investigation would continue for months, the trial would drag on for years, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope that we could build something honest from the wreckage of Elena's deception. After all, we'd survived the perfect manipulation by one of the world's most skilled intelligence operatives. Surely we could survive the truth about ourselves. 4 months into the federal trial, the courtroom had become as familiar as our own living room. David and I sat in the witness section, watching prosecutor Amanda Hayes methodically dismantle Elena's defense team with the precision of a surgeon. Today marked the beginning of what the media had dubbed the family infiltration trial of the century. Elena's defense strategy had evolved considerably since her initial arrest. Gone was any pretense of innocence. Her lawyers couldn't argue with 3 years of recorded evidence. Instead, they were painting her as a victim of coercion, a former intelligence operative, forced to continue working for Russian handlers who threatened her daughter back in Moscow. Ms. Vasquez, defense attorney Mitchell Graham said during cross-examination, when you assumed Margaret Morrison's identity, were you acting under duress? Elena sat perfectly composed in her defendant's chair, wearing a conservative navy suit that made her look more like a suburban grandmother than an international spy. Even now, months after her arrest, the transformation was unsettling. I was given no choice, Elena replied, her voice carrying just the right amount of trembling emotion. My handlers informed me that if I didn't complete the Morrison operation, my daughter Anna would disappear. She's all I have left in this world. It was a compelling narrative, and I could see some jury members responding to her apparent vulnerability. Elena was still manipulating people even from the defendant's table. Prosecutor Hayes rose for redirect, her expression skeptical. Ms. Vasquez,
You mentioned your daughter Anne. Can you tell the court when you last spoke with her? Elena's composure flickered for just a moment. It's been several years. Communication was restricted for operational security. Several years, Hayes repeated, consulting her note. Would it surprise you to learn that Anna Vasquez died in a car accident in Moscow in 2015, 3 years before you began the Morrison operation? The courtroom erupted. Elena's defense team objected frantically, but the damage was done. Hayes had just proven that Elena's entire defense was built on manipulating the jury's sympathy for a daughter who'd been dead for years. Furthermore, Hayes continued, once order was restored, telephone records show that you maintained regular contact with your handlers throughout the operation. These weren't the communications of someone acting under duress. These were the reports of an enthusiastic operative proud of her work. Elena's mask of vulnerability cracked completely. For a moment, the courtroom saw the cold intelligence operative who'd planned our murders with clinical detachment. During a recess, David and I met with Hayes in her office to review our upcoming testimony. The walls were covered with evidence charts mapping Elena's network across 12 states, a visual representation of the scope of her organization's infiltration of American families. Elena's defense team is going to try to paint you both as willing participants, Hayes warned us. They'll argue that you knowingly allowed a foreign operative into your home, that you were complicit in the intelligence gathering. David shook his head. How can they possibly argue that? We were the ones who exposed her. They'll point to the 3 years you accepted her as family, Hayes explained. They'll suggest that trained defense contractors should have been more suspicious of her interest in your work. It's a weak argument, but they're desperate. Miss Chin, who'd become our unofficial counselor through this process, had prepared us for these attacks. Remember, she'd said, manipulation only works because it exploits genuine human emotions. Your trust wasn't a weakness, it was Elena's weapon. The prosecution had revealed that Elena's network extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Operation Family Tree, as the FBI had designated it, involved 17 operatives, infiltrating 43 families across multiple states. Elena had been the most successful operator, gathering the highest value intelligence, while maintaining her cover the longest. The other families, I asked Hayes, are they testifying too? Hayes nodded grimly. Those who survived. Elena's network eliminated 12 families who became suspicious, or outlived their usefulness. You and David are among only 6 couples who lived to testify. The weight of that statistic settled over us. We weren't just victims, we were incredibly lucky survivors of a systematic murder operation disguised as identity theft. When David took the stand the following day, Elena's defense attorney Graham immediately attacked his credibility. Ms. Morrison, you hold a security clearance that requires you to report suspicious contacts with foreign nationals, correct? Yes, David replied steadily. And yet for 3 years you regularly discussed classified projects with someone you believed to be your mother, never thinking to verify her identity or report these conversations. David's jaw tightened. I was talking to someone I believed was my mother, the same woman who'd raised me, who'd been part of my family for my entire life. The idea that she might be a foreign spy was inconceivable. Inconceivable, Graham repeated, or convenient. Isn't it true that you were struggling financially, that your mother's supposed medical expenses were being paid by mysterious benefactors? The attack was calculated to make David appear either incompetent or corrupt, but Hayes had prepared him for this. The medical expenses were paid by Elena herself, using money stolen from other victims. David responded. She created the appearance of outside financial support to make her medical crises seem more authentic. It was all part of her operational cover, Graham pressed on. But you never questioned where this money came from. I was told it came from my mother's insurance policies. Elena provided detailed documentation, all of it forged. As we later learned, she'd spent 3 years building a completely convincing financial history. When my turn came to testify, Graham's strategy shifted to attacking my mental state. Ms. Morrison, you've been receiving psychological treatment for anxiety and guilt related to a car accident, correct? Yes, I replied, grateful for the hours of preparation with the prosecution team. And during this treatment, you discussed intimate details of your marriage, your work, your daily life, with your therapist. Yes, Graham smiled coldly. What you didn't know was that your therapist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, was reporting your sessions directly to Elena Vasquez. You were unknowingly providing intelligence about your own psychological vulnerabilities to a foreign operative. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Martinez, the therapist Elena had recommended, had been part of the network. Every session where I'd worked through my manufactured guilt, every breakthrough in understanding my anxiety, every private moment of healing, all of it had been reported back to Elena. Hayes objected, but the damage was psychological rather than legal. Elena's operation had been even more invasive than we'd realized. She hadn't just stolen our identities and planned our deaths. She'd weaponized my therapy against me. Dr. Martinez has been arrested as part of this investigation, Hayes announced during redirect, addressing the jury directly. Her therapeutic license was obtained using forged credentials. She was never a licensed psychologist. She was another member of Elena's intelligence network. The scope of the deception was staggering. Elena hadn't just infiltrated our family, she'd constructed an entire support network of fake professionals, designed to monitor and manipulate us. During Elena's own testimony, she displayed the same calculated emotional manipulation that had fooled us for 3 years. She spoke about missing her deceased daughter, about the pressure from her handlers, about the genuine affection she'd developed for David and me. I want the court to understand, Elena said, addressing the jury directly, that every moment of love I showed these people was real within the constraints of my situation. Yes, I was gathering intelligence. Yes, I was following orders, but the care I felt for David and Sarah was genuine. It was the same twisted logic she'd used during our confrontation at the federal holding facility. The idea that authentic emotion could coexist with calculated betrayal. Hayes demolished this narrative during cross-examination. Vasquez, if you genuinely cared for the Morrisons, why did you plan to kill them? Because attachment to targets is a professional liability, Elena replied without thinking, then seemed to realize how that sounded to a jury. A professional liability, Hayes repeated. Is that how you viewed the murder of 12 other families as professional necessity? Elena's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand the pressure, the impossible choices. I understand that you murdered David's real mother to assume her identity. I understand that you manufactured Sarah's psychological trauma for easier manipulation. I understand that you spent 3 years planning the deaths of 2 innocent people who trusted you completely. The jury's expressions had shifted from sympathy to horror as Elena's true nature was revealed. During closing arguments, Hayes presented the case with devastating clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a story about a desperate woman forced into terrible choices. This is the story of a professional killer who turned a family's love into a weapon against them. She gestured toward the evidence tables, filled with surveillance equipment, forged documents, and recorded conversations. Elena Vasquez didn't just steal the Morrisons' identities, she stole 3 years of their lives, their sense of security, their ability to trust. She murdered a mother and psychologically tortured her son. She manufactured trauma for a young woman, and then exploited that trauma for intelligence gathering. The defense's closing argument focused on Elena's supposed coercion and the complexity of intelligence operation. Graham portrayed her as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, a former operative trapped by her past, but the jury had seen through Elena's manipulation. After only 6 hours of deliberation, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, multiple charges of first-degree murder, espionage, identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy against the United States. As the judge read the sentence, life in prison without possibility of parole, Elena's facade finally crumbled completely. The grandmother figure disappeared, replaced by the cold operative who'd spent 3 years planning our deaths.
You think this ends anything, Bola? Elena called out as bailiffs restrained her. There are others like me and families across this country. The operation continues. Her final words sent chills through the courtroom, a reminder that Elena's network might have been dismantled, but the methodology she'd perfected could be replicated. After the trial, David and I began the long process of rebuilding our lives. The federal government provided new identities and financial compensation, but the psychological work of recovery was entirely our responsibility. We sold our house, the scene of too much violation and surveillance, and moved across the country to start fresh. The therapy we underwent together was genuine this time, with a psychologist thoroughly vetted by federal authorities. The hardest part, our therapist, Dr. Williams, observed during one session, isn't dealing with what Elena did to you. It's learning to trust your own judgment again after being manipulated so thoroughly. She was right. Every decision, every new relationship, every moment of vulnerability was shadowed by the knowledge that we'd been completely fooled by someone we'd loved and trusted. But slowly, over months of careful work, we began to distinguish between genuine emotions and manufactured ones. We learned to recognize the difference between healthy skepticism and paranoid hypervigilance. The media attention was intense for months. The family infiltration case became a cautionary tale about domestic security threats, spawning books, documentaries, and congressional hearings about intelligence vulnerabilities in American families. Mrs. Sheen, who'd become a close friend through our ordeal, helped us navigate the public attention. "You survived something that was designed to be unsurvivable," she reminded us. "That's not just luck, that's strength you didn't know you had." A year after Elena's conviction, we received an unexpected visitor. Agent Rodriguez appeared at our new home with a briefcase full of documents. "Elena's appeals have been exhausted," he reported. "But before her final transfer to federal supermax prison, she requested one last meeting with you both." David and I exchanged glances. We'd rebuilt our lives specifically to escape Elena's influence. Why would we voluntarily subject ourselves to her manipulation again? "She claims to have information about other active operations," Rodriguez continued. "Intelligence that could save other families currently being targeted. But she'll only share it with you." The decision was agonizing. Seeing Elena again risked undoing months of psychological healing. But if she could prevent other families from experiencing what we'd endured, didn't we have an obligation to help? "What do you think?" David asked me. I thought about the other survivors we'd met during the trial, the families who'd lost everything to Elena's network, the 12 families who hadn't survived at all. I think," I said slowly, "that we've learned to recognize her manipulation. We're not the same people who trusted her blindly for 3 years." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "The meeting would be in a maximum security facility with full monitoring. She'd have no opportunity to harm you or manipulate you." As we drove toward what might be our final confrontation with Elena Vasquez, I realized that this decision itself represented our recovery. We weren't acting out of fear or guilt anymore. We were choosing to face our past with the strength we'd gained from surviving it. Elena might have one more game to play, but this time we knew the rules. The ADX Florence Supermax prison appeared on the Colorado horizon like a monument to human failure, concrete walls rising from barren landscape, designed to contain the most dangerous criminals in America. As our federal escort vehicle passed through multiple security checkpoints, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that always accompanied thoughts of Elena. "Last chance to change your minds," Agent Rodriguez said from the front seat. "Once we're inside, you're committed to seeing this through." David reached for my hand, a gesture that had become our anchor through 18 months of recovery. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." The visiting room was sterile and monitored, with reinforced glass separating us from a woman who'd once helped me choose Christmas presents for David. Elena entered wearing standard prison attire, her hair shorter and streaked with gray that made her look every one of her 58 years. But her eyes were the same, calculating, intelligent and disturbingly warm when they focused on us. "Sarah, David," she said into the intercom, her voice carrying genuine pleasure. "You look well. Healthy. I'm so glad." The casual familiarity was jarring after everything we'd been through. Elena spoke as if we were old friends catching up rather than victims confronting their would-be murderer. "Agent Rodriguez tells me you have information about active operations." I said, keeping my voice steady. Other families in danger. Elena smiled, that same maternal expression that had fooled us for 3 years. Always straight to business. Sarah, one of the things I admired about you. She settled back in her chair, completely at ease despite the maximum security setting. There are currently 6 active family infiltration operations in progress. Elena began matter-of-factly, the Chen family in Portland. The operative is posing as the deceased grandfather. The Rodriguez family in Miami, a fake sister-in-law who survived a fictional plane crash. The Williams family in Chicago. Stop, David interrupted. Why are you telling us this? What do you want in return? Elena's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine hurt. What I want, David, is for you to understand that everything wasn't a lie. The love I felt for you, the pride when you got promoted, the joy at your wedding, those emotions were real. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Ms. Vasquez, if you have actionable intelligence about ongoing operations, we need specific details, names, locations, operational parameters. Oh, I'll give you everything, Elena assured him. But first, I need Sarah and David to understand the truth about their selection as targets. The real truth, not the sanitized version your investigators provided. She looked directly at me through the glass. Sarah, do you remember the day we first met? At David's birthday party 3 years ago. I nodded reluctantly. The memory was still vivid. Elena arriving with homemade cake, immediately making me feel welcomed into David's family. That wasn't our first meeting. Elena said quietly. I'd been watching you for 6 months before that party. Following you, learning your routines, studying your vulnerabilities. David's grip on my hand tightened. Why 6 months before you approached us? Elena's smile was set. Because the real Margaret Morrison had been asking questions about financial irregularities in her accounts, questions that would have led to discovering my network. She had to be eliminated, but I needed time to study her son's emotional patterns first. The clinical way she discussed murdering David's mother was chilling, but Elena continued as if describing a business transaction. During those 6 months of surveillance, I discovered something unexpected. Sarah, you were already investigating inconsistencies in your car accident case. You'd hired a private investigator to review the traffic camera footage. My blood turned cold. I had hired an investigator and he'd disappeared before completing his work. Thomas Mitchell, Elena said, noting my expression. Excellent investigator. Very thorough. Unfortunately, his investigation would have revealed that your accident was part of a deliberate operation to create psychological vulnerability in potential intelligence targets. David stared at me. You never told me you hired an investigator. I was trying to prove my innocence, I said weakly. I thought if I could show the accident wasn't my fault. Elena nodded approvingly. Exactly what we needed you to think. Sarah, your car accident wasn't random. You were selected as a target 6 months before the incident occurred. The other driver was working for my network. The room seemed to spin around me. Elena was claiming that even my trauma, the foundational guilt that had shaped our entire relationship, had been deliberately manufactured as part of a long-term operation. The private investigator you hired discovered this. Elena continued. His final report detailed how the accident was staged, how the insurance investigation was corrupted, how your guilt was artificially created. Thomas Mitchell died in what appeared to be a mugging 3 days before he was scheduled to meet with you. Agent Rodriguez was taking rapid notes. You're confessing to another murder. I'm providing context. Elena corrected. Sarah's psychological vulnerability wasn't an opportunity we exploited. It was a condition we created. The guilt, the anxiety, the need for maternal approval. All of it was engineered to make her susceptible to my influence. David's voice was barely controlled. You manufactured everything. Even before you killed my mother, you were already destroying our lives. I was doing my job, Elena replied simply. Sarah worked for defense contractors. David had access to classified systems. Your combined intelligence value was enormous. The operation to recruit you began long before I assumed Margaret Morrison's identity. She paused, studying our faces with what looked like genuine concern. But somewhere during those 3 years, something unexpected happened. I began to care about you both, not as targets, not as intelligence sources, but as family. Elena's voice carried a note of wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe it herself. For the first time in my career, emotional attachment became stronger than operational necessity. When Moscow ordered your elimination, I delayed. I created medical emergencies to buy time. I hoped to find a way to extract the intelligence without killing you. But you were going to kill us, I said. The chemical weapons, the forged death certificates, because I had no choice. Elena's composure cracked for the first time. My handlers became suspicious of the delays. They sent an enforcement team to oversee the final phase. If I hadn't appeared to proceed with your elimination, they would have killed all 3 of us. Agent Rodriguez looked up from his notes. Enforcement team. We didn't find evidence of additional operatives. Elena smiled grimly. Because they were never inside your house. The men who posed as medical staff were the enforcement team. They were monitoring my performance, ensuring I followed through with the mission. She turned back to David and me. The chemical I released wasn't lethal. It was a sedative, designed to incapacitate you long enough for me to stage your deaths. I had prepared bodies from the morgue, homeless individuals with similar physical characteristics. The plan was to fake your murders, then help you escape with new identities. David shook his head. That's impossible. We saw the chemical analysis. You saw the analysis of the chemical I told you I was using. Elena interrupted. The actual substance was a modified anesthetic that would have kept you unconscious for 6 hours, long enough for the enforcement team to verify your deaths and leave. Agent Rodriguez consulted his file. The forensic analysis showed lethal concentrations of the chemical I claimed to be using. Elena finished. I provided false samples to your investigators. The real substance was never tested, because you never suspected I might have been trying to save you. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Elena was claiming that her murder attempt had actually been an elaborate rescue operation, that even in her final betrayal she'd been trying to protect us. Why should we believe you? I asked. Elena reached into her prison shirt pocket and withdrew a small USB drive. Because I kept evidence of everything. Recorded conversations with my handlers, documentation of the enforcement team's presence, proof that the morgue bodies were prepared as substitutes. She slid the drive across the table toward the glass partition. There's also something else on there. Video footage of Margaret Morrison's final days, recorded by surveillance I installed in her home, footage that proves she discovered my identity theft operation and was planning to expose. David's face had gone white. You recorded my mother's murder. I recorded her decision to sacrifice herself to protect you, Elena said softly. When Margaret realized what I was, she could have gone to the police immediately. Instead, she spent her final weeks gathering evidence about my network, preparing a comprehensive file that would protect you from retaliation. Elena's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since the arrest. Your mother knew she was going to die, Dave, but she chose to use her remaining time to ensure your safety. The car accident was necessary to prevent her from being interrogated, but by then she'd already hidden evidence that would expose my entire network if anything happened to you. Agent Rodriguez reached for the USB drive. Where is this evidence? Safe deposit box at First National Bank in Denver, Elena replied. Margaret Morrison's name, box 20. The key is in her jewelry box, hidden inside the pearl necklace she wore to your wedding. David's hands were shaking. The necklace she insisted I keep after she died, the one Sarah wears on special occasions. Elena nodded. Margaret planned every detail. She knew I would want to maintain the appearance of normal family relationships, so she ensured the key would stay close to you both. Agent Rodriguez was already on his radio, coordinating teams to retrieve the evidence, but Elena wasn't finished with her revelations. The 6 families I mentioned earlier, she continued, they're not just being targeted for intelligence gathering, they're being eliminated as part of a broader operation to remove witnesses to previous infiltrations. Everyone who might have seen through the deception is being systematically murdered, including us, David asked. Including you, Elena confirmed. My arrest didn't end the threat, It escalated it. My network believes you know too much to survive. That's why I've been requesting this meeting for months. You're both still in danger. Agent Rodriguez looked up from his radio. What kind of danger? Elena's expression was grave. The enforcement team that oversaw my operation is still active. They have new identities, new operational covers, and they have orders to eliminate every loose end from Operation Family Tree. She reached across the table as far as the restraints would allow. David, Sarah, you need to understand. The trial, the media attention, the public identification as survivors, all of it has painted targets on your backs. My network can't allow you to live with what you know. What do we know? I asked. The operation is over. Your network is dismantled. The domestic network is dismantled. Elena corrected. But Operation Family Tree was just one cell of a much larger organization. International assets, deep cover operatives who've been in place for decades, financial networks that span 12 countries. You've only seen the tip of the iceberg. Agent Rodriguez was coordinating frantically on his radio, but Elena's attention remained focused on us. There's something else, she said quietly, something I never told the investigators, because I wasn't sure you could handle it, but if you're really in danger, you need to know. David and I exchanged glances. After everything we'd learned, what could possibly be worse? The real reason you were selected as targets, Elena said slowly, wasn't just your intelligence value, it was personal. Someone high in my organization wanted you specifically eliminated. Who? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Elena hesitated for the first time since entering the room. Thomas Mitchell, the private investigator Sarah hired, was my brother. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena's brother had been the investigator trying to prove my innocence, and she'd murdered him to protect her operation. Thomas wasn't just investigating Sarah's accident, Elena continued, tears flowing freely now. He was investigating. He'd discovered that his sister had died in a Moscow car accident in 2009, and been replaced by a GRU operative. He was trying to prove that I wasn't really Elena Vasquez. David's voice was hollow. You killed your own brother. I killed someone who was threatening the most important operation of my career, Elena replied, someone who would have destroyed everything I'd built, but I also killed the only family I had left in the world. She looked directly at me. When Thomas died, I inherited his case file. I learned everything about you, Sarah. Your integrity, your determination to find the truth, your refusal to accept convenient lies. That's when I realized you were exactly like him. Elena wiped her eyes with her shackled hands. Targeting you wasn't just operational necessity. It was personal revenge against the kind of person my brother had been, the kind of person who asks inconvenient questions and refuses to stop investigating until they find answers. Agent Rodriguez closed his radio and faced Elena directly. Ms. Vasquez, if you're telling the truth about ongoing threats, we need specific intelligence, names, locations, operational timelines. Elena nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. Everything is on the USB drive. Intercepts of communications with my handlers, documentation of the enforcement team's current operations, financial records that will lead you to the broader network. She focused on David and me one final time. I want you both to know that saving you from the enforcement team would have been worth destroying my career. In the end, the love I felt for you both became more important than any mission. Elena stood, signaling the end of our meeting. David, your mother's final gift to you is hidden in plain sight. Use it to protect yourself and Sarah. And Sarah, she paused, struggling with emotion. My brother would have been proud of you. You never stopped fighting for the truth. As guards escorted Elena away, she called back one final message. Check your new house carefully. If the enforcement team has found you, they're already inside. The drive back to our Colorado home was tense with new paranoia. Agent Rodriguez had coordinated with local federal teams to sweep our house, but Elena's warning had shattered the sense of security we'd rebuilt. Do you believe her? David asked, as we approached our neighborhood. About trying to save us? I don't know, I replied honestly. But about the ongoing danger? Yes, she has no reason to lie about that. Our house was surrounded by federal vehicles when we arrived. Agent Martinez met us at the door with a grim expression.
we found evidence of surveillance equipment, she reported, professional grade, recently installed. Someone has been watching you for weeks. Inside, our home had been transformed into a crime scene for the second time in our marriage, but this time we weren't victims, we were prepared. The evidence Elena had provided led to arrests across 3 countries within 72 hours. The enforcement team was captured, attempting to infiltrate a 4th family in Seattle. The 6 active operations Elena had identified were shut down, saving 18 innocent lives. Margaret Morrison's safety deposit box contained exactly what Elena had promised: comprehensive evidence of the international network, along with a final letter to her son. David, I read aloud from Margaret's handwriting. If you're reading this, then the woman you believe is your mother has been exposed. I want you to know that my love for you was real, and my final act was ensuring your safety. Trust Sarah, trust your instinct, and never stop fighting for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The letter was dated 2 days before Margaret's death, proof that she'd known her fate, and chosen to face it with courage. 6 months later we sat in our new home, our 4th relocation since Elena's arrest, reading news reports of the final trials. The international network had been dismantled, hundreds of operatives arrested, dozens of families saved. Elena Vasquez had died in federal custody, apparently of natural causes, though conspiracy theorists suggested otherwise. Her final act had been providing intelligence that saved more lives than she'd taken during her criminal career. Do you think she really loved us? David asked, setting aside the newspaper. I considered the question that had haunted us for years. I think she learned to love us despite herself. Whether that makes her a victim, or a villain, I'm not sure it matters anymore. David nodded, reaching for my hand in the gesture that had anchored us through everything. What matters is that we survived, and we're still together. Outside our window, federal agents maintained their protective surveillance, a reminder that some dangers never fully disappear. But inside our home, we'd built something real from the wreckage of Elena's deception. We'd learned to trust again, carefully and selectively. We'd learned to recognize manipulation while remaining open to genuine emotion. Most importantly, we'd learned that love could survive even the most sophisticated attempts to weaponize it. The woman who'd posed as David's mother for 3 years was gone, but the strength we'd found in fighting her manipulation remained. In the end, Elena Vasquez had given us something she'd never intended: the unshakable knowledge that our love for each other was real, tested under the most extreme circumstances possible. As I watched David reading in the evening light, I realized that Elena's greatest failure wasn't getting caught, it was believing that authentic human connection could be manufactured, manipulated, and controlled indefinitely. She'd built her operation on lies, but in the process, she'd forced us to discover truths about ourselves and each other that no amount of deception could destroy. The nightmare was over. The healing would continue for the rest of our lives. But we were alive, we were together, and we were finally truly free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.